You won't believe this. What began as a routine school bus drive turned into a scene of unimaginable humiliation and bravery. Marlon Davis, a dedicated school bus driver, thought it was just another regular day, taking his students to school. But then, out of nowhere, he found himself in a confrontation with police officers who didn't care that the kids were watching. What happened next was more than anyone could have expected, and what those kids did left everyone stunned. Marlon Davis loved his job. Being a school bus driver wasn't exactly glamorous, but for Marlon, it meant everything. Every morning, he drove through the quiet streets before dawn, picking up kids and watching their sleepy faces come to life as they boarded his bus. Over time, he had become more than a driver to them. He was a friend, a mentor, even a protector in their eyes. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, just before sunrise, as Marlon did his usual rounds. The early morning fog clung to the road, and the bus headlights cast long shadows. Marlon greeted each student with a warm smile, asking about their families, homework, and weekend plans. Some of the younger kids showed off their latest drawings or talked about their new favorite movies, while the older ones just nodded in sleepy acknowledgement. By 7:45 a.m., the bus was full, and Marlon started his final drive to the school. The kids' laughter and chatter filled the air as they settled into their seats. He glanced into the rearview mirror, feeling a sense of pride and contentment. They were his kids, his responsibility, and he took that seriously. But as he approached a stop sign just a few blocks from the school, something caught his attention. A police cruiser was parked across the street, and the two officers inside seemed to be watching the bus closely. Marlon felt a pang of unease. He wasn't doing anything wrong, of course, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being singled out. Shrugging it off, he continued down the street, keeping his eyes on the road. Just as he pulled away from the stop, the cruiser's lights flashed on. Marlon's stomach dropped as he realized the officers were pulling him over, right in front of the kids. "Why would they be stopping us?" one of the students, a boy named Jaden, asked, his voice filled with nervous curiosity. Marlon forced a calm smile, though his heart was racing. "I'm sure it's nothing, Jaden. Maybe they just need to ask me a question. Everything's okay." But as Marlon pulled over to the curb, he could feel the tension thickening. He turned off the engine, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as he watched the officers approach in the mirror. His mind raced with questions and fears. He'd heard stories of black men stopped by the police for no reason, treated as criminals before they even spoke a word. But surely, they wouldn't do anything in front of the kids, would they? As the officers reached the door of the bus, Marlon opened it, keeping his expression neutral. "Good morning, officers," he said, his voice steady but guarded. The taller officer, with a stern look on his face, ignored Marlon's greeting. "We need to see your ID and registration, sir," he said, his tone brisk and devoid of any warmth. Marlon nodded, reaching slowly for his wallet, making sure his movements were clear and careful. He could feel the eyes of every child on him, and he forced himself to stay calm. The last thing he wanted was to scare them. "Is there a problem?" he asked, handing over his documents. The officer looked him over with a scrutinizing glare. "We received a report of a suspicious vehicle matching this description," he said, his words clipped. "Just doing our job." Marlon's heart sank. A suspicious vehicle, how many times had he heard that phrase used as an excuse to pull over black drivers? But he kept his composure, hoping that this would be over quickly. Behind him, the kids were silent, their usual laughter and chatter replaced by a tense, uncomfortable stillness. Marlon could feel their unease. They looked up to him, and he didn't want them to see him afraid. But deep down, he was terrified, not just for himself, but for what this moment might teach them about the world. After what felt like an eternity, the officer finally handed back Marlon's ID, his face still hard and unyielding. "We'll let you go this time," he said, "but watch yourself." Marlon felt a surge of anger but swallowed it, nodding instead. "Thank you, officers," he replied, his voice steady. As he closed the bus door and started the engine, he could feel the kids' eyes on him, filled with questions and confusion. They knew what had happened wasn't right, even if they didn't fully understand it. And Marlon knew that this moment, this encounter, would linger in their minds, shaping the way they saw him and, perhaps, the world. He pulled away from the curb, heart pounding, determined to get the kids to school safely. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that something had shifted, not just for him, but for everyone on that bus. The rest of the drive to school felt unusually silent. Marlon could sense the shift in the kids' energy, they weren't laughing or chatting anymore, and he could almost feel the weight of their stares in the rearview mirror. They'd seen something raw and unsettling, something Marlon had always hoped they'd be shielded from. As they neared the school, one of the younger students, a third grader named Maya, leaned into the aisle and asked softly, "Mr. Davis, why were the police mad at you?" Marlon's grip on the wheel tightened as he searched for the right words. How could he explain this to them? They were kids, innocent, full of hope, untouched by the ugliness he knew too well. He didn't want them to carry his fears, but he also didn't want to brush it off as if nothing had happened. "They weren't mad at me, Maya," he said gently, glancing back at her. "Sometimes, people make mistakes. They thought I might have done something wrong, but I didn't. I showed them I was just doing my job, and they let us go." Maya nodded, but her big eyes remained fixed on him, clearly unconvinced. She was too smart to miss the unease in his voice. Sitting nearby, Jaden, a fifth grader known for asking tough questions, cleared his throat. "But, why did they stop us at all?" he asked. "They know you're our driver. We see you every day." Marlon hesitated, his mind racing. He could feel the tension simmering in the bus, the unspoken questions bubbling up in the kids' minds. He'd seen this too many times before, encounters that left him feeling powerless, fighting to keep his dignity intact. But these kids were watching, waiting for answers. And he realized that this might be his moment to teach them something they wouldn't learn in school. "You know," Marlon began, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes people judge others without knowing who they really are. They look at the outside, not the inside. Today, maybe that's what happened." The bus was silent as his words sank in. Marlon could see the wheels turning in their young minds, each of them processing what he'd said in their own way. Some looked down, while others glanced at each other, as if seeking answers in each other's faces. Finally, a voice from the back spoke up, Kayla, a shy fourth grader who rarely spoke. "That's not fair, Mr. Davis," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're nice. They shouldn't have stopped you." Marlon's heart clenched. Her simple words held a depth of understanding that both comforted and saddened him. She was right, it wasn't fair. But that was the reality he'd come to accept, a reality he'd hoped they wouldn't have to see, at least not yet. As they pulled up to the school, Marlon parked the bus and took a deep breath, turning to face his young passengers. "Thank you, Kayla. And thank you all for being so understanding," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "Just remember, no matter what happens, we should always treat each other with respect and kindness. That's how we make the world a better place." The kids nodded, some still deep in thought, others offering small, supportive smiles. Marlon opened the bus door, letting them out one by one, each of them saying goodbye in their usual way, a high five, a fist bump, a wave. As the last student stepped off the bus, Marlon closed the door, allowing himself a moment to breathe. He knew that today had changed something, not just for the kids, but for himself. He'd been forced to confront his own fears in front of them, to show a side of himself he rarely let anyone see. And while it was difficult, he realized that maybe this was an opportunity, a chance to show these kids that courage wasn't about never feeling afraid, it was about facing that fear and standing tall anyway. Before driving away, Marlon watched the kids walk into the school building, feeling a surge of pride. They were good kids, thoughtful, compassionate, and resilient. Today had been a lesson for them, a glimpse into a world he wished they didn't have to see, but he knew they would be stronger for it. With a heavy sigh, he started the engine and headed back to the bus yard, hoping that the next trip would be smoother. But something inside him told him that this was far from over, that this moment would echo, rippling through his life and theirs, in ways he couldn't yet foresee. As Marlon drove back to the bus yard, his thoughts lingered on the morning's events. His usual route back was a time for peace, but today his mind was too full, filled with the children's questions, their confused faces, and the tense encounter that started it all. The weight of it settled over him like an unwelcome blanket. He kept replaying the officer's scrutinizing gaze and the rigid tone of his voice. When he finally parked, Marlon found his supervisor, Ms. Green, waiting for him in the office. Her expression was unreadable, which was never a good sign. He took a deep breath before stepping inside, bracing himself. "Marlon," she began, crossing her arms, "we had a call from the school. Apparently, some parents are upset about what happened this morning." Marlon's heart dropped. He'd hoped the situation would quietly fade away, but he should have known it wouldn't be that simple. "They're asking questions," Ms. Green continued. "The school principal mentioned that some of the kids were upset when they got to class. Parents want to know why a police car was involved on a school bus route." Marlon nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. He could already feel the walls closing in, the familiar sensation of being cornered, scrutinized. "I understand, Ms. Green. The officers stopped us, and I was just following instructions. I tried to keep it calm for the kids." Ms. Green's eyes softened slightly, and she seemed to sigh. "I know, Marlon. But we have to handle this carefully. It's a sensitive situation." Sensitive. That was the word people always used to tiptoe around moments like these. Sensitive topics, sensitive incidents, as if acknowledging the truth outright would make it harder to swallow. Marlon took a deep breath, his mind swirling. "Ms. Green, I've been on this route for years. The kids know me, and the parents do too. I didn't ask to be stopped. I was just doing my job." She nodded, but he could see the hesitation in her eyes. "We know that, Marlon, but the district is concerned about the optics. They're already receiving calls from the press, somebody must have mentioned the incident." The press. Just the mention made Marlon's stomach tighten. The last thing he needed was reporters spinning this into a story without knowing the real truth, stirring up questions that would hang over his head like a storm cloud. Ms. Green offered a small smile. "Take it easy for now, Marlon. We'll sort this out. Just be prepared for questions. And remember, we're here to support you." Marlon nodded, though he felt anything but supported. He knew Ms. Green was trying to help, but there was only so much she could do in a situation like this. He'd seen this before, people would avoid taking sides, tiptoeing around the issue while he bore the full brunt of the fallout. Leaving the office, Marlon felt a strange mix of anger and exhaustion. He was tired of walking on eggshells, of being careful with every word, every look, every action. He'd built his life around following the rules, believing it would shield him from these moments. But now, he wasn't so sure. As he reached his car, Marlon noticed his phone buzzing. A text message from an unknown number lit up his screen. "Mr. Davis, my son told me what happened this morning. Thank you for standing up for the kids. I appreciate everything you do." The message stopped him in his tracks. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, but he guessed it was one of the parents. For a moment, Marlon's frustration eased. There was someone out there who understood, who saw him not as a troublemaker, but as the man who drove their children safely every day. Maybe he wasn't as alone in this as he felt. But as the day wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He knew the questions would keep coming, that he'd face skepticism and scrutiny. And despite Ms. Green's reassurances, he sensed that the district would be watching him closely, ready to point fingers if things got messy. By the time he arrived home that evening, Marlon felt drained. He could still hear the murmurs of the kids, the worried looks they'd exchanged, the awkward way Ms. Green had sidestepped the real issue. It all replayed in his mind, leaving him restless. Just before going to bed, Marlon thought about the kids. They looked up to him, trusted him. That thought alone gave him some comfort. He wouldn't let them down, no matter what was thrown his way. And he'd make sure they knew it, that he'd stand up, even when things got difficult. And somewhere deep inside, he felt a spark of hope. He might be in the middle of a storm, but he wasn't about to back down. Not for anything. The next day at the bus yard felt heavy with anticipation. Marlon arrived early, hoping to beat the crowd and find a moment of peace. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the parked buses. But instead of the usual calm, an undercurrent of tension buzzed through the air, a palpable sense of something lurking just beneath the surface. As he walked to his bus, he noticed a couple of his colleagues gathered near the break room, their heads bent together, their voices low. When Marlon approached, they fell silent, casting furtive glances in his direction. The atmosphere shifted, it was clear they were talking about him. "Hey, Marlon," one of them, Jake, said with forced cheerfulness. "Ready for another day?" "Sure," Marlon replied, sensing the unease. "Just doing my job." They nodded too quickly, the conversation shifting back to their earlier whispers. Marlon's stomach churned. He had hoped for solidarity from his co-workers, but their body language spoke volumes about the gossip spreading through the yard. When he climbed aboard his bus, the familiar scent of vinyl and metal mixed with a hint of morning coffee calmed him, if only slightly. But the moment he turned the ignition, the rumors began to seep in. "Did you hear about the driver who got stopped by the cops?" one of the kids on the bus blurted out, his voice filled with curiosity. Marlon's heart sank. "Yeah, I heard a little about it," he said, keeping his tone light. "They said you were in trouble," another child chimed in, wide-eyed. "Don't worry about that," Marlon replied, forcing a smile. "Sometimes police just need to check things out. I'm fine." The chatter among the kids continued, but Marlon could hear the underlying confusion. The last thing he wanted was to be the subject of their worries. He tried to focus on the road, but his mind was racing. How would he reassure them? How could he maintain their trust? As the day progressed, it felt as if every parent and child knew about the incident. The school seemed more chaotic than usual. In the halls, whispers swirled around him, and Marlon could feel the weight of their stares. After the morning route, he found himself speaking with a few parents as they picked up their kids. Most were polite, but he could sense their caution, their eyes searching for any sign of controversy. "We just want to make sure our kids are safe," one mother said, her tone edged with concern. "I understand completely," Marlon responded, forcing sincerity into his voice. "I'm here to protect them, just like always." But the lingering doubts hung in the air like an unwelcome fog. As Marlon returned to the bus yard for the afternoon route, he noticed Ms. Green talking to a group of parents. They were animated, and Marlon caught snippets of their conversation, words like safety and concern floated toward him. Feeling a knot tighten in his stomach, Marlon stepped back into his bus, the doors closing behind him like a barrier against the world. He gripped the steering wheel, the familiar comfort of the vehicle no longer soothing him. He felt isolated, trapped between the kids who relied on him and the adults who questioned him. When the bell rang, the students filed onto the bus, their chatter a mix of excitement and apprehension. Marlon greeted them with a smile, but the joy he usually felt was overshadowed by the recent turmoil. He was losing his footing, the foundations of trust beginning to crack. On the way home, one of the older students, a girl named Aisha, spoke up from the back. "Mr. Davis, why did the cop stop us? Were we in trouble?" The question pierced through the facade Marlon had been maintaining. He glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting her earnest gaze. "No, Aisha. We weren't in trouble. Sometimes things happen that we can't control, but you're safe with me. I promise. He tried to convey his sincerity, but he could see doubt flickering in the eyes of the other children. Their innocence made it all the more painful. He wondered if they could truly understand the complexities of his world, the pressures that swirled around him, threatening to consume him. After dropping the students off, Marlon parked the bus and slumped against the seat, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy blanket. He wanted to scream, to vent his frustrations, but there was no one he could turn to. It felt like he was fighting a battle alone, and the weight of that reality pressed down on him. The next morning, as Marlon prepared to face another day, he felt a flicker of determination spark within him. He had to find a way to navigate this storm, to protect his students while also standing firm in his own truth. They needed to see that he wouldn't back down, no matter how the winds of scrutiny blew. Marlon squared his shoulders, reminding himself that the real battle was just beginning. The next chapter of this struggle would define not just his career, but the lives of those he drove each day. And he would face it head-on, no matter the cost. The following week dawned cold and gray, mirroring the heaviness that had settled over Marlon's life since the incident. The gossip had transformed into something more tangible, an undercurrent that threaded through the bus yard, wrapping around him like a shroud. Each day felt like a trial, the eyes of parents, students, and colleagues weighing down on him with unspoken judgments. As Marlon navigated his route, he felt the tension in the air. The kids were quieter, their playful banter replaced by hushed conversations. Aisha, the girl who had questioned him about the police incident, was unusually subdued. Marlon had seen her face light up with laughter just days ago, now, it was shadowed with worry. He wondered if the other students were feeling the same pressure, the looming threat of adult concerns creeping into their youthful joy. That afternoon, as the last of the students filed off the bus, he noticed Ms. Green standing at the entrance of the school, arms crossed and brow furrowed. She appeared deep in conversation with a small group of parents, their expressions a mixture of concern and anger. Marlon felt a prickle of anxiety. Had they come to confront him? To demand answers he didn't have? "Mr. Davis." Ms. Green called out as he stepped off the bus. Her voice was firm, cutting through the usual noise of the yard. "Can we have a word?" Marlon's heart raced, but he nodded, steeling himself for what was sure to be an uncomfortable conversation. The group of parents turned to face him, their expressions serious, a line of tension etched across their brows. "We're worried about the safety of our children," Ms. Green began, her tone measured yet firm. "After what happened last week, several parents have expressed concerns about letting their kids ride the bus." Marlon opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He swallowed hard, the weight of their worries pressing down on him. "I understand your concerns," he finally managed, his voice steady. "But I assure you, I'm dedicated to their safety. I've been a driver here for years, and I would never put them at risk." "But what about the police?" one father interrupted, his arms crossed. "What if something like that happens again? We can't just ignore the fact that you were harassed in front of the kids." "That's just it," Marlon said, trying to keep his frustration at bay. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was simply doing my job. The police were acting on their own biases, and that's a problem, not just for me, but for all of us." Ms. Green's expression softened, but the tension in the group remained. "We just want to make sure our kids are safe, Marlon. It's not just about you, it's about the community, too. There are parents who feel uneasy about this whole situation." Marlon could feel the chasm between them widening. The parents had every right to be concerned, but he also felt the sting of their mistrust. "I can't control how the police act or how people perceive me," he said, raising his voice slightly. "But I can control how I treat your kids. They trust me. I've built that trust over years, and I won't let it slip away because of one incident." The silence that followed was deafening. Marlon could see doubt flickering in their eyes, the uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. He knew he needed to do something drastic to regain their trust, to show them he was not just a driver, but a protector. "I'll hold a meeting," Marlon proposed, his voice gaining confidence. "I want you all to come. We can talk about this openly. I want to hear your concerns and answer your questions." The parents exchanged glances, weighing his offer. Finally, Ms. Green nodded. "That's a good idea, Marlon. We appreciate you being proactive. We'll spread the word." As the group began to disperse, Marlon felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this meeting could help bridge the gap, alleviate some of their fears. But deep down, he knew the road ahead would be long and challenging. In the days leading up to the meeting, Marlon prepared feverishly. He gathered materials, statistics on safety measures, and even reached out to a few local community leaders who had been active in discussions about police accountability. He wanted to come armed with knowledge, to show that he was not just a victim of circumstance but an advocate for change. Finally, the evening of the meeting arrived. The school's cafeteria buzzed with parents, their murmurs echoing off the walls. Marlon stood at the front, anxiety swirling in his stomach as he faced a sea of skeptical faces. He took a deep breath, reminded himself of his purpose, and began. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice steady despite the jitters. "I know there's been a lot of concern about my recent encounter with the police, and I want to address that head-on. I'm here to listen to you and to ensure that your children feel safe while they're in my care." He spoke earnestly, recounting the incident without embellishment, focusing on the impact it had on him and the students. He emphasized that safety was a shared responsibility, one that extended beyond the bus yard and into the community. "I want to work together with you," he continued, inviting questions and concerns. "Let's discuss what we can do as a community to ensure our children's safety and well-being." As the night wore on, Marlon felt a shift. Parents began to open up, sharing their own fears and experiences with the police. The atmosphere changed from one of suspicion to one of solidarity. Marlon's heart swelled with hope as they brainstormed ways to create a safer environment for everyone, determined to tackle the issues head-on. By the end of the meeting, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The parents were starting to see him not just as a bus driver but as a member of their community, a man committed to their children and their safety. However, he also sensed that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The issues they had discussed were deeply rooted in systemic problems that couldn't be solved overnight. But Marlon was ready to fight, not just for himself but for the trust of the community and the safety of the kids he cared for. As he left the cafeteria, he felt a surge of determination. The gathering storm had not broken him, instead, it had ignited a fire within him. He was no longer just Marlon Davis, the bus driver. He was a voice for change, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following days felt like a turning point for Marlon. The energy at the bus yard had shifted, infused with a newfound sense of purpose. As he drove his route, the students' chatter returned, and their laughter echoed in the aisles, drowning out the earlier tension. Marlon felt buoyed by their spirit, grateful that the meeting had sparked a ripple effect within the community. But beneath the surface, he knew the real work was just beginning. With the parents rallying behind him, he took the initiative to organize a community forum, inviting local leaders, educators, and even police representatives to discuss the issues at hand. He wanted to foster an environment of transparency and understanding, one where everyone's voice could be heard. As the forum day approached, Marlon's anticipation mixed with apprehension. He wanted to ensure that the event didn't just become another talk shop where nothing changed. He envisioned it as a springboard for action, a catalyst for real conversations about race, safety, and community. On the day of the forum, the local community center buzzed with activity. Marlon arrived early, making sure everything was in place, the chairs arranged, the microphone set up, and the refreshments ready. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him as attendees began to filter in, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The room quickly filled, and Marlon stood at the front, heart racing as he looked out at the crowd. Parents, students, teachers, and even a few officers had come to listen. Marlon took a deep breath and welcomed everyone, expressing gratitude for their presence. "We're here today to talk about our community and how we can work together to make it safer and stronger for our children," he began, his voice steady. "This is a space for open dialogue, where we can share our experiences, express our concerns, and seek solutions together." As the discussions unfolded, stories emerged, some heartbreaking, others infuriating. A mother spoke of her son's experience being stopped by police while walking home from school. A teacher shared the struggles of her students, who often felt caught between different worlds. The police representatives listened, occasionally taking notes, their expressions betraying a range of emotions. Marlon moderated the conversation, encouraging everyone to speak openly and respectfully. He knew this was a delicate balance. The police needed to be part of the solution, not seen as the enemy. As the dialogue progressed, he could feel the atmosphere shifting, moving toward understanding rather than blame. "I think it's important for us to realize that we're all part of this community," one officer finally spoke up, his voice firm but calm. "We want to protect you, but we need your help to do that. We can't operate in a vacuum. We need to understand your concerns and experiences." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, some parents nodding while others remained skeptical. Marlon seized the moment, encouraging further dialogue. "It's true that trust has been broken, but rebuilding that trust takes effort from both sides. How can we create opportunities for more open communication?" As the forum continued, ideas flowed, and a sense of collaboration began to take root. Marlon watched as community members, once divided by their experiences, found common ground in their shared goal of safety and understanding. They began brainstorming initiatives, community patrols, regular forums, and outreach programs that would help bridge the gap between residents and law enforcement. As the event drew to a close, Marlon felt a surge of hope. "We may not have all the answers today," he concluded, "but this is just the beginning. Let's commit to keep these conversations going and work towards solutions that benefit everyone." The applause that followed was genuine, the room filled with a shared determination. As attendees began to leave, Marlon felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him. The seeds of change had been sown, and while he knew it would take time, he felt energized by the possibility of what they could achieve together. That night, as he sat on his porch, Marlon reflected on the day's events. The community's response had exceeded his expectations, and he felt a deep sense of connection to the people he served. But he also knew that not everyone would be pleased with this newfound unity. There would be challenges ahead, and not all would embrace the changes he hoped for. Over the next few weeks, Marlon continued to engage with the community, attending school events, hosting informal gatherings, and keeping the dialogue alive. He felt empowered by the support of parents and students, and together, they began to build a network of advocates for change. But lurking in the background, the shadow of dissent grew. Some community members were resistant to the changes, clinging to their prejudices and fears. Marlon began to hear whispers, murmurs of discontent surfacing in corners of the town where people were reluctant to embrace the progress being made. One evening, as Marlon left a school meeting, he was approached by a group of parents who had not been involved in the discussions. Their expressions were wary, and Marlon felt a chill as they confronted him. "We don't want to change the way things are," one father said bluntly. "We want our kids to know their place. You shouldn't be stirring up trouble." Marlon's heart raced, but he kept his composure. "I'm not stirring up trouble, I'm trying to create a safer environment for everyone. Our kids deserve better than to be judged by the color of their skin or the way they dress." The father scoffed. "That's not how the world works. You're just making things worse." Marlon took a step back, the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "No, what's worse is allowing fear and ignorance to dictate our lives. We can do better. Our kids deserve better." The father shook his head, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "You'll see, Davis. You can't change the world. Just know that there are people who don't want this change." As Marlon walked away, he felt the weight of their words settle in his chest. He had known there would be resistance, but facing it head-on left him feeling vulnerable. Still, he knew he couldn't back down. The momentum was building, and he was determined to see it through. As the weeks rolled by, Marlon found himself enveloped in a whirlwind of activity. The community forum had sparked numerous initiatives, and excitement buzzed in the air. The school organized workshops on diversity and inclusion, and several local organizations collaborated on programs aimed at bridging the gap between the community and law enforcement. However, the resistance he sensed was not simply going to fade away. At the bus yard, Marlon often overheard whispers among the drivers, some supportive, others openly critical. One afternoon, as he was prepping his bus, he overheard a conversation between two veteran drivers, Jake and Leo, who had been with the district for years. "I don't know why he's making such a fuss," Jake grumbled, adjusting his cap. "Things were fine the way they were. No need to stir the pot." Leo chimed in, "Yeah, he thinks he can just change everything with a few meetings and forums. It's naive." Marlon's heart sank at their dismissive words. He had hoped for more support, especially from his fellow drivers. He knew he had to confront them, to let them know that silence would only perpetuate the issues they were facing. "Hey, can we talk?" Marlon interrupted, stepping into their line of sight. Both men turned to face him, their expressions a mix of surprise and reluctance. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Jake replied, feigning nonchalance. Marlon took a deep breath. "I've been hearing some comments, and I just wanted to understand where you're coming from. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us, our kids, and how they see the world." Jake scoffed. "And you think a few meetings are going to change decades of division? You're dreaming." Marlon felt the heat rising in his cheeks. "It's not about dreaming, it's about taking action. If we don't address these issues, nothing will ever change. Do you really want to raise our kids in a world where they feel unsafe just because of the color of their skin?" Leo shrugged. "You're making it sound like the whole system is out to get us. That's not how it is." Marlon took a step closer, his voice firm. "No, that's not what I'm saying. But if we ignore the experiences of those who are affected, people like our students and their families, we're part of the problem. We can't be afraid to have these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable." For a moment, silence hung in the air, tension crackling between them. Then Jake spoke again, his tone softer, "I just think it's too much. Some folks don't want to hear this, and pushing it on them will only make things worse." "Maybe, but that doesn't mean we should stop trying," Marlon insisted. "If we don't advocate for our kids, who will? We need to show them that it's okay to stand up for what's right, even if it's hard." Jake looked away, and Leo remained silent, contemplating Marlon's words. Marlon felt a flicker of hope, perhaps he could reach them. Before he could say more, another driver, Sam, approached, sensing the tension. "What's going on here?" Marlon turned to Sam, relieved for a new perspective. "Just having a chat about the changes in the community and why they matter." Sam nodded, crossing his arms. "Yeah, I've been hearing a lot about what Marlon's trying to do. It takes guts to stand up like that. We should support him." Jake rolled his eyes. "And what good will that do? We'll just be stirring up more trouble. Or maybe we'll actually make a difference," Sam replied firmly. "You can't expect change to happen without putting in the effort. It's time to face the reality we live in." Marlon felt a wave of gratitude toward Sam. "Exactly. We need to come together, not pull apart. This isn't just about one person's efforts, it's about all of us doing better for our kids." As the conversation continued, Marlon felt the tide shift, just slightly. Though not everyone was convinced, there was a glimmer of understanding forming among the drivers. With renewed resolve, he decided to organize a training session specifically for the drivers on topics of bias and cultural awareness. That weekend, as Marlon prepared for the session, he reflected on the importance of community support. He wanted to create a safe space where drivers could express their fears and misconceptions without judgment. The goal was to foster empathy and open their eyes to the realities their students faced. The training day arrived, and Marlon set up chairs in a large circle, creating an inviting atmosphere. He had invited a local speaker, a woman named Angela, who was a well-respected community activist known for her work in bridging divides. Marlon was hopeful that her presence would help facilitate deeper discussions. As the drivers filed in, the atmosphere felt tense but curious. Marlon introduced Angela, who began with a personal story about her own experiences with racism, illustrating the everyday struggles faced by individuals in their community. "I'm not here to blame anyone," Angela said, her tone calm yet compelling. "I want to help us all understand the complexities of these issues. When we listen and share, we can grow together." Marlon watched as the drivers' expressions shifted from skepticism to engagement. They began asking questions, sharing their own stories, and slowly, the walls started to come down. As the training session unfolded, Marlon felt a sense of triumph. He witnessed drivers who had once dismissed his concerns begin to grasp the impact of their actions and words. By the end, many expressed gratitude for the opportunity to learn and promised to be more mindful moving forward. After the session, as everyone mingled and shared refreshments, Jake approached Marlon, his expression softer than before. "I didn't realize how much I didn't know," he admitted. "Thanks for pushing us to see things differently." Marlon smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "That's what it's all about, learning together. We're in this as a community." Just as they were beginning to relax, a loud voice boomed from outside the community center. "What's this? A bunch of weaklings talking about feelings?" Marlon turned, his stomach dropping as he recognized the voice. A group of men stood outside, a few wearing the insignia of a local motorcycle club known for their hardline views against the changes Marlon was advocating for. "Why don't you tell us how to raise our kids while you're at it?" one of the men sneered, stepping forward. Marlon felt a surge of anger but knew this wasn't the time to escalate. He took a breath and stepped outside, flanked by a few of the drivers who had just attended the training. "Can I help you?" Marlon asked, keeping his voice steady despite the tension. "Yeah, we don't need you telling us how to think," the man replied, crossing his arms defiantly. "This town doesn't need your kind of change." Marlon stood tall, refusing to back down. "This isn't just about me. It's about our kids and creating a safe environment for everyone. You can choose to be part of the problem or part of the solution." The men exchanged glances, and for a moment, the air was thick with hostility. But Marlon's resolve shone through. He wasn't going to allow fear to dictate the narrative any longer. The confrontation escalated briefly, words exchanged and tempers flaring, but the drivers around Marlon rallied in support, standing firm beside him. It became clear that this community was beginning to unite, even in the face of opposition. Eventually, the men retreated, their taunts fading into the distance. Marlon felt a mix of adrenaline and relief as he returned inside, the supportive murmurs from the drivers reaffirming that they were willing to stand together against hatred. As the session concluded, Marlon knew that this was just the beginning. The resistance would persist, but so would his commitment to fostering understanding. Together, they could face the challenges ahead, united in their quest for change. The following week, the aftermath of the confrontation lingered in the air like a low hum. Marlon felt the pressure building not only from the recent events but also from the weight of his responsibilities. He had ignited a spark within the community, but he knew it needed to grow into a flame of unity and action. With the help of a few supportive drivers and community members, Marlon decided to organize a rally to raise awareness about racism and its effects on the local community. He wanted to bring together people from all walks of life to stand in solidarity against injustice. The idea was ambitious, but Marlon felt an unwavering sense of purpose. He spent the following days working tirelessly, reaching out to community leaders, local businesses, and organizations that had previously shown interest in addressing social issues. Flyers were designed, social media posts were created, and a local radio station agreed to promote the event. Marlon even approached the school administration, hoping to encourage students and their families to join. "Imagine the impact we could have," Marlon explained to Principal Reed during a meeting. "If we can show our kids that we're united against racism, it could inspire them to stand up for what's right." Principal Reed nodded, visibly moved. "You're right, Marlon. This isn't just about the adults, it's about teaching our kids the importance of acceptance and respect. I'll help you spread the word through the school's channels." With renewed vigor, Marlon returned to the bus yard to finalize details for the rally. He was encouraged to see many of his fellow drivers offering to help, each contributing their ideas and resources. The day of the rally arrived, and Marlon woke up early, anticipation coursing through him. He donned a shirt that read "Unity in Diversity" and felt a surge of hope for what the day would hold. As he arrived at the park where the rally was set to take place, Marlon was taken aback by the turnout. The grassy expanse was dotted with colorful signs, banners, and people of all ages gathering, chatting, and preparing for the day's events. The air was thick with excitement and determination. Marlon moved through the crowd, greeting familiar faces and newcomers alike. He spotted Sam and a few other drivers setting up a booth for sign-making. "Looks great, everyone," Marlon called, feeling a rush of pride. As the rally began, Marlon stepped onto the stage, heart racing as he prepared to speak. The crowd hushed, all eyes on him. He took a deep breath and began, his voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here today. This rally is not just about raising awareness, it's about coming together as a community to confront the issues of racism and inequality that affect us all. Each of us has a role to play, and together we can make a difference." Marlon shared personal stories, including his own experiences with prejudice and discrimination. He spoke passionately about the need for empathy and understanding, urging those present to reflect on their own biases and the ways they could support one another. "I stand here not just as a bus driver, but as a father, a neighbor, and a member of this community. We owe it to our children to create a world where they can feel safe and accepted for who they are." As he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Marlon felt a wave of exhilaration wash over him. This was what he had envisioned, a community united in a common cause. After his speech, Marlon encouraged attendees to participate in various activities planned for the day, workshops on cultural awareness, art projects promoting unity, and discussions led by local leaders about how to address racism in everyday life. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, Marlon noticed a small group gathered near the entrance. It was a mix of parents, students, and community members, all engaged in animated conversations. He approached, intrigued by the lively atmosphere. "Isn't this amazing?" a woman named Rosa said, her face lit up with excitement. "I didn't realize how many people cared about these issues. It feels like we're finally coming together." Marlon nodded enthusiastically. "It really is. This is just the start. Imagine what we can achieve if we keep this momentum going." The group exchanged ideas about future events and initiatives, and Marlon felt a sense of optimism blossoming within him. They discussed forming a community task force to address ongoing issues, ensuring that their voices would continue to be heard. As the evening progressed, Marlon took a moment to step back and reflect. He watched as families laughed together, children painted their visions of unity, and conversations flowed freely among people who had previously felt divided. This rally was more than just a stand against racism, it was a celebration of diversity, a testament to the power of community. But in the back of his mind, Marlon couldn't shake the feeling that they had only begun to scratch the surface. The resistance from the motorcycle club and others would not vanish overnight. He knew that real change would require continuous effort, commitment, and, most importantly, solidarity. Just as the rally was winding down, a sudden shout pierced through the evening air. Marlon turned to see a small group of men approaching, their faces familiar from the confrontation outside the community center. The tension in the air thickened as they drew closer. "Look at this pathetic gathering," one of them called out, voice dripping with disdain. "You really think this is going to change anything?" Marlon felt his heart race, but he forced himself to stand firm. "We're not here to argue with you. We're here to support each other and promote understanding. If you want to talk, we can do that, if you're open to it." The men exchanged skeptical glances, but a few in the crowd stepped forward, clearly unafraid to confront them. "Maybe you should listen for once," Sam chimed in, standing alongside Marlon. "We're tired of hate. It's time to move forward together." The group began to chant, voices rising in unison. "Unity in diversity. Unity in diversity." The men hesitated, their bravado faltering as they faced the resolute crowd. With a final sneer, they turned away, but not without casting a lingering shadow over the evening. Marlon felt a mixture of relief and anger wash over him. The confrontation had not escalated, but it was a stark reminder of the obstacles they still faced. He turned back to the crowd, determination hardening in his heart. "Let's not let fear dictate our actions," he said, raising his voice. "This is our community, and we will not back down. Together, we can overcome hate with love and understanding." As the rally concluded, Marlon found a renewed sense of hope. They had taken a powerful stand, and although challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them united. The aftermath of the rally reverberated through the community. Marlon found himself inundated with messages of support, but with that came backlash from those who opposed the movement. He had anticipated resistance but never quite imagined how fierce it would be. Just a few days after the rally, Marlon was driving his usual route, the bus filled with students chatting animatedly about the event. Their enthusiasm was infectious, but as he maneuvered through the familiar streets, a sense of unease crept over him. He noticed a group of men lingering on a street corner, their eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. As he approached the stop, the men moved closer, their postures aggressive. One of them, the same one who had confronted him at the rally, stepped forward, blocking the bus's path. Marlon's heart raced as he slowed to a stop, unsure of how the situation would unfold. "Look who it is, the hero of the neighborhood," the man sneered, his voice laced with mockery. "You think you're making a difference? You're just stirring the pot." Marlon took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I'm just trying to create a better environment for everyone, including you." The man stepped closer, his friends flanking him. "You think we want your kind of change? You're just making things worse. Why don't you take your little rally and go home?" Marlon felt the weight of their hostility, but he refused to back down. "This isn't about me. It's about the community. If you're not interested in being part of the solution, that's on you." As the exchange escalated, the students on the bus fell silent, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Marlon felt a surge of protectiveness for them, not wanting to expose them to this unnecessary aggression. "Just let the kids off," he said, maintaining a steady tone. "They don't need to witness this." One of the men laughed derisively. "Look at you, playing the noble bus driver. But you can't protect them from the truth. We see what's really going on here." The situation was tense, and Marlon's mind raced. He knew that backing down could send the wrong message, yet he also needed to keep his students safe. He decided to focus on the kids. "All right, everyone," Marlon called, trying to sound upbeat. "We're going to make a quick stop. Let's all stay calm and collected." The students shuffled in their seats, whispers of concern spreading through the bus. Marlon noticed a few of them pulling out their phones, likely recording the altercation. That realization sent a jolt of apprehension through him. He didn't want this to turn into a spectacle. He steered the bus to a safe location a block away, where he could let the students off without escalating the confrontation. As he did, the group of men followed, still taunting him from behind. "Run away, hero," one of them shouted, but Marlon's focus was on his students. He opened the doors and gestured for them to exit. Alright, everyone off. Go straight to the school. I'll be right behind you, he instructed, his voice firm. The students hurried off the bus, but not without casting worried glances back at Marlon. As the last student stepped down, he turned to face the men, determination replacing his initial fear. What do you want? Marlon demanded, trying to project confidence. If you have something to say it to me, not the kids. The lead man stepped closer, the rest of his friends hanging back, emboldened by his bravado. We just want you to understand that not everyone is on your side. You think you can just come in and change things? You have no idea who you're messing with. Marlon held his ground, refusing to be intimidated. I'm not trying to change anyone. I'm advocating for respect and understanding. That's not a crime. Maybe not, but it's not our way, the man retorted. You'd better watch your back. People like you don't belong here. With that, the group turned away, their laughter fading as they walked back to the corner. Marlon felt a mix of relief and anger bubbling inside him. The confrontation had left him shaken, but he refused to let it deter him from his mission. Once he was alone on the bus again, Marlon took a moment to collect his thoughts. He could feel the weight of the students' gazes lingering on him, their concern palpable. He drove the remaining distance to the school, determined to address what had happened. As he parked the bus and prepared to meet the administration, Marlon knew he needed to convey the seriousness of the situation without inciting fear. Inside the school, he found Principal Reed already waiting for him, concern etched on her face. I heard what happened. Are you okay? Marlon nodded, though he felt the knot in his stomach tighten. I'm fine, but we need to discuss how to handle this. If they're willing to confront me like that, what does it mean for our students? The two of them sat down in the principal's office, and Marlon recounted the incident in detail. Principal Reed listened attentively, her expression serious. I'm glad you didn't engage them further, she said. We need to create a safe environment for our students, and it's clear this isn't just about a few isolated incidents anymore. It's a systemic issue. Marlon agreed. We can't let fear dictate our actions. We need to come together as a community, but we also need to prepare our students for the reality they might face. They brainstormed ideas on how to implement educational programs on racism and conflict resolution, hoping to equip students with the tools to address prejudice in their lives. We could invite guest speakers, hold workshops, and engage students in discussions, Principal Reed suggested. It's crucial that they feel empowered to speak up against racism. Marlon felt a surge of hope. Yes. If we can reach out to the parents and the community, we can create a ripple effect. This has to be bigger than just one rally or one incident. As they continued to discuss their plans, Marlon realized that the confrontation had only strengthened his resolve. They were up against a significant challenge, but with support and determination, he knew they could make a difference. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Marlon and Principal Reed. They mobilized resources, reaching out to local organizations and community leaders to help facilitate workshops and discussions centered around racism, respect, and understanding. Each session they planned aimed to empower students and parents alike, fostering a safe space for dialogue about the challenges they faced. On the day of their first community meeting, Marlon felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The gymnasium was decorated with banners promoting unity and respect, and chairs were set up in a large circle, encouraging participation. He watched as families began to trickle in, some familiar faces from the bus route, others new. As the room filled, Marlon took a deep breath, reminding himself of the importance of this moment. He stood at the front, alongside Principal Reed, who began the meeting by welcoming everyone. Thank you all for being here today, she said, her voice steady. We're here to address an important issue that affects us all, racism and prejudice in our community. Marlon took his cue, stepping forward to share his story. A few weeks ago, I faced a confrontation that made me realize how necessary this dialogue is, he began, recalling the incident with the group of men. I know I'm not alone in this. We've all faced our own challenges, and it's time we come together to address them. He encouraged the attendees to share their experiences, creating a safe environment for vulnerability. One by one, hands began to rise, voices emerging from the crowd. A mother spoke about her fears for her son, a black teenager navigating a world that often saw him as a threat. A young girl shared her feelings of isolation in school, where her classmates used derogatory language without understanding its impact. As the stories flowed, Marlon felt the collective pain and resilience in the room. The discussions were raw and honest, often punctuated by moments of silence as people absorbed the weight of each revelation. It's not just about one person or one incident, Marlon emphasized. It's about the system that allows these beliefs to thrive. We must educate ourselves and our children to recognize and challenge racism wherever we see it. The dialogue shifted to solutions, ideas flowed freely as parents and students suggested community events, workshops on conflict resolution, and educational programs that could be implemented in schools. The energy in the room began to shift, turning from despair to determination. As the meeting wrapped up, Marlon felt a renewed sense of hope. The discussions had sparked something within the community, a desire to unite and take action. He and Principal Reed decided to form a community task force dedicated to continuing these conversations, organizing events, and advocating for policy changes in the school system. Over the next few months, they launched a series of workshops and events aimed at educating both students and parents. Guest speakers from diverse backgrounds shared their experiences, creating a tapestry of stories that resonated with everyone in attendance. The community began to see changes, small but significant, as students started to stand up for one another, challenging harmful language and behavior among their peers. However, not everyone welcomed this shift. Marlon began to receive anonymous threats, taunting him for his activism. The fear that had once gripped him began to resurface, but he refused to let it dictate his actions. He confided in Principal Reed, who assured him they would not be deterred by intimidation. "Your courage has already inspired so many, Marlon," she said. "We're in this together, and we will continue to fight for our students' right to feel safe and respected." Marlon took comfort in her words. They began to strategize ways to ensure the safety of the task force members while continuing their advocacy. They organized meetings with local law enforcement, inviting officers to discuss how they could work together to create a safer environment for everyone. As the weeks went on, the momentum grew. More families began to engage in the task force's initiatives, and Marlon felt a sense of pride as he witnessed the community rallying around a cause that was so vital. One evening, as they were preparing for another community meeting, Marlon received a call from a local news station. They wanted to cover the story of the task force and the positive changes happening in the community. Marlon was initially hesitant. He worried about the attention it might bring, especially given the threats he had been receiving. However, he realized that visibility could be powerful. Sharing their story might inspire other communities to take action against racism and prejudice. He agreed, and the following week, cameras arrived at the school gymnasium, capturing the essence of their efforts. As Marlon spoke to the camera, he focused on the unity and resilience he had witnessed within the community. "We are committed to creating a safe environment for all our students. We won't be silenced by those who wish to spread hate." The coverage reached far and wide, sparking conversations across social media platforms. Marlon's story resonated with many, and letters of support poured in from unexpected places. He felt a wave of encouragement as people shared their own stories of fighting against racism in their communities. But with the newfound attention also came backlash. The same group that had confronted him weeks ago began to organize, determined to disrupt the progress they were making. Marlon received messages warning him of impending confrontation, and his heart sank. "We can't back down now," he told Principal Reed as they discussed the threats. "This is too important. We need to show our students that we will stand up against hate, no matter the cost." They decided to hold an open forum, inviting the community, including dissenters, to share their views. It was a bold move, but Marlon believed in the power of dialogue to bridge divides. As the forum approached, Marlon felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that this could either be a turning point for the community or a catalyst for further conflict. He prepared himself mentally for the challenges ahead, reminding himself that the fight against racism required both courage and compassion. The day of the open forum arrived, and the atmosphere buzzed with a mix of anticipation and tension. Marlon stood outside the gymnasium, watching as families and individuals trickled in. He could see the faces of his supporters and those who had shared their stories in previous meetings. But he also noticed a group of individuals lingering at the entrance, their body language radiating hostility. He recognized them as the same men who had confronted him weeks before. As the doors swung open, Marlon felt a surge of anxiety. Would they come to disrupt, or had they come to listen? Principal Reed, sensing his apprehension, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Remember, we are here to foster dialogue," she said, her voice steady. "Let's focus on the message we want to convey." Inside, the gymnasium was decorated with banners that read "Unity" and "Respect." Chairs were arranged in a large circle, inviting everyone to sit together and share their thoughts. Marlon took a deep breath, gathering his resolve, and stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "We're here to discuss a critical issue affecting our community, racism and the need for understanding and compassion." He glanced around, trying to connect with the audience. "I believe that through open dialogue, we can begin to address the challenges we face." Marlon welcomed a few community leaders who had offered their support, allowing them to share their insights. As they spoke, he noticed the group of dissenters becoming increasingly restless. Whispers passed among them, and he could feel their anger simmering just beneath the surface. When the time came for open discussion, Marlon encouraged everyone to share their thoughts, no matter how difficult. A young woman stood up, her voice shaky but determined. "I've experienced racism firsthand, and it's exhausting," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We need to change this narrative." Applause erupted, and Marlon felt hope swell within him. He knew there were those who shared a vision for a better community, but he also sensed the dissenters growing more agitated. Then, it happened. One of the men from the group stood up abruptly, his face twisted with rage. "You think we need to coddle people like you?" he shouted, pointing at Marlon. "You're trying to turn our kids against us." Marlon felt the tension in the room shift. He could see heads turning, eyes widening. Principal Reed stepped in quickly. "This is a space for respectful dialogue," she stated firmly. "We invite all voices, but we will not tolerate hate." The man scoffed, stepping further into the circle. "You're just trying to push your agenda. This isn't about understanding, this is about silencing us." Marlon took a deep breath, stepping forward to address the man directly. "This is exactly the kind of conversation we need to have," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "What you're feeling, fear, anger, is valid. But it's important to realize that racism affects all of us, and addressing it doesn't mean taking anything away from anyone. It means creating a more equitable society for everyone." Another member of the group shouted, "What about our rights?" Marlon raised his hands to calm the room. "We're not here to take away rights, we're here to expand understanding. We want everyone to feel safe in this community, including you." The exchange was heated, but Marlon maintained his composure. The dialogue continued, with people from both sides expressing their views. As the hours wore on, it became clear that many in the audience were there to seek understanding, even if they didn't always agree. The tension peaked when one of the dissenters made a derogatory comment about the young woman who had spoken earlier. Gasps echoed through the gym, and Marlon felt a fire ignite within him. He stepped toward the man, heart racing. "That comment is unacceptable," Marlon declared. "You don't get to belittle someone's pain. We're all human, and we need to treat each other with respect, regardless of our differences. The gym fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For a moment, it seemed like the dissenters might retreat, but instead, they doubled down, arguing louder, their frustrations spilling over. Realizing the situation was escalating, Principal Reed intervened again. "Let's take a moment to breathe," she suggested, signaling for everyone to pause. "We are here to listen and learn. It's okay to disagree, but it's crucial that we do so respectfully." Slowly, the tension began to dissipate. People shifted in their seats, some visibly shaken by the confrontation. Marlon took this opportunity to pivot the conversation back to empathy and understanding. "I know these discussions are challenging," he said, his voice steady. "But we cannot shy away from them. It's only through dialogue that we can heal and move forward as a community." As the forum continued, Marlon noticed a shift among some of the dissenters. Although they didn't agree with him, he saw a few of them listening more intently, perhaps considering perspectives they hadn't before. As the evening drew to a close, Marlon felt both exhausted and energized. The confrontation had been intense, but it had sparked necessary conversations. He glanced around the room, taking in the determined faces of those who stood with him, and felt a sense of hope. "We've made progress today," he said, addressing the audience. "This is just the beginning. Let's keep this dialogue going. Together, we can create the change we want to see." The crowd erupted in applause, and Marlon felt a warmth spread through him. He knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but this moment marked a significant turning point. As the attendees began to disperse, Marlon caught sight of the group of dissenters. They stood huddled together, speaking quietly. One of them, a younger man with a weary expression, caught Marlon's eye. He hesitated before approaching. "Hey," he said, his voice uncertain. "I just wanted to say. I don't agree with everything, but I appreciate that you're trying to bring people together." Marlon smiled, recognizing the sincerity in the young man's eyes. "Thank you for saying that. It's important we keep talking. We all have more to learn." As they exchanged a few more words, Marlon felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. This wasn't about winning arguments, it was about opening hearts and minds. And in that moment, he knew that change was not only possible but already beginning to take root. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but Marlon was ready to face them. With the support of his community, he felt emboldened to continue the fight against racism and injustice, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized. As he left the gym that night, he was filled with a sense of purpose and determination. Together, they would continue to strive for a future where everyone could feel safe, respected, and valued, a future where racism would no longer hold sway.